The late 16th century in Joseon, Korea was a time of quiet beauty, but beneath the surface a storm was gathering. Joseon, a kingdom nestled on a peninsula, had enjoyed centuries of relative peace. Its society was deeply rooted in Confucian ideals, valuing scholarly pursuits and diplomacy over military might. This made it a land of poets and scholars, but also a land largely unprepared for the harsh realities of war. They lived in a state of comfortable isolation, their navy primarily a coastal defense force, their army more ceremonial than combative. This complacency, however, was about to be shattered by an ambition far beyond their borders. Across the sea in Japan, a powerful figure had emerged, Toyotomi Hideyoshi. He was a man who had risen from humble beginnings to unify a fractured Japan, bringing an end to a century of civil war. But Hideyoshi's ambition didn't stop there. He dreamed of an empire stretching across Asia, and Joseon was merely the first stepping stone on his path to conquer Ming China. His armies were battle-hardened, forged in the fires of unification, and equipped with modern firearms obtained from European traders. Japan was a nation ready for war, and Joseon, tragically, was not. Joseon's military reflected its peaceful disposition. The land forces were poorly trained and equipped, often led by officials appointed through patronage rather than merit. The navy, while present, was largely neglected. Its ships were mostly slow, lightly armed vessels designed for coastal patrols, not for engaging a formidable invasion fleet. There was a pervasive belief that Joseon was too insignificant to be a target, or that any threat would be easily repelled. This naive optimism was a dangerous blind spot. Even as early warnings arrived, they were largely dismissed. Joseon envoys sent to Japan returned with chilling reports of Hideyoshi's aggressive intentions, detailing his grand plans for conquest. They spoke of massive troop mobilizations and an unprecedented naval build-up. Yet the Joseon court, mired in factional disputes and political infighting, chose to ignore these urgent pleas. The warnings were seen as exaggerations, the envoys as alarmists. The whispers of war were drowned out by the petty squabbles of the palace. Amidst this backdrop of complacency and impending doom, a remarkable figure was slowly making his way through the ranks. Yi Sun-sin. His early life was far from privileged. He came from a family that had fallen on hard times, and his path to military service was fraught with challenges. He failed his military exam once, breaking his leg, but returned and passed with flying colors. Even after becoming an officer, he faced constant obstacles. He was known for his integrity, his refusal to compromise his principles, and his sharp strategic mind. These very qualities often put him at odds with the corrupt officials who prioritized personal gain over national security. He was transferred frequently, often to remote and undesirable posts, a testament to his unwillingness to play political games. Yi's initial naval commands provided him with a stark realization. He saw firsthand the deficiencies of the Joseon Navy, the lack of discipline, the poor training, the outdated ships, and the absence of a coherent strategy. Unlike his peers, Yi didn't just lament the problems, he began to fix them. He started implementing rigorous training regimens, instilling a sense of discipline and purpose among his men. He understood that a strong navy was Joseon's only hope against a sea-borne invasion. It was during this critical period that Yi Sun-sin began to conceptualize and develop what would become one of the most innovative warships in history, the Geobukseon, or turtle ship. He didn't invent the concept from scratch. Prototypes had existed before, but Yi took the existing ideas and transformed them into a revolutionary armored vessel. He oversaw its design and construction, pushing for its unique features. A fully covered deck, protected by iron spikes making boarding impossible, and multiple cannon ports for all-around firepower. This project, driven by Yi's foresight and sheer determination, was a desperate race against time, a direct response to the gathering storm on the horizon. He knew that conventional ships would not stand a chance against the formidable Japanese fleet, and so he sought to build something entirely new, something that would turn the tide of an inevitable war. His efforts were often met with resistance, skepticism, and insufficient funding, but Yi pressed on, driven by an unwavering sense of duty and the knowledge that Joseon's survival might very well depend on these innovative vessels. The turtle ship was not just a ship. It was a symbol of resistance, a testament to ingenuity born of necessity and an early sign of the strategic brilliance that would define Yi Sun-sin's legendary career. Yi Sun-sin's vision for naval reform went far beyond just building new ships. He knew that even the most advanced vessel was useless without a skilled crew and a sound strategy. His efforts to overhaul the Joseon Navy were relentless, bordering on obsessive. He focused tirelessly on discipline, knowing that a well-ordered force could overcome numerical disadvantages. He implemented new training protocols, not just for sailing and combat, but also for teamwork and communication. He understood that strategic positioning was key, and he spent countless hours studying the coastlines, currents, and potential battlegrounds, anticipating where the Japanese might strike. The turtle ship, or Geobukseon, was the crown jewel of Yi's reform. Its construction was a marvel of engineering for its time. It wasn't merely an upgrade, it was a complete reimagining of naval warfare. The ship's unique design featured a fully enclosed, dome-shaped deck covered with iron spikes. This meant enemy soldiers couldn't board it, turning the traditional Japanese boarding tactics into a death trap. The deck also had openings that allowed sulfur smoke to be pumped out, disorienting and suffocating anyone attempting to get close. Beneath this armored shell, the turtle ship bristled with cannons. It had multiple cannon ports on all sides, allowing it to fire in any direction without having to turn broadside. This made it incredibly versatile and deadly in close-quarters combat. The ship was also fast and highly maneuverable, powered by both sails and oars, making it effective in various wind conditions. It was, in essence, a floating fortress, an impenetrable weapon designed to counter the Japanese light, fast, and boarding-focused ships. Yi's rigorous training regimens transformed his sailors and marines. He didn't just teach them how to fight. He taught them how to fight as a cohesive unit. His men practiced naval tactics constantly, repeating maneuvers until they were second nature. Archery was emphasized, as were close-quarters combat skills, understanding that sometimes the fight would get personal. Yi pushed his men hard, demanding excellence and unwavering loyalty. He took a complacent, often neglected force and forged it into an elite fighting unit, ready for the challenges ahead. He understood that the spirit of the men was as important as the strength of the ships. Logistical challenges were a constant thorn in Yi's side. He navigated bureaucratic hurdles that seemed designed to frustrate him. Resources were always scarce, and he often faced outright opposition and skepticism from superiors who saw his innovations as unnecessary expenses. He had to scrounge for timber, iron, and gunpowder, often using his own meager funds or appealing directly to local communities. His ability to manage these limited resources while simultaneously building and supplying his fleet showed an incredible talent for organization and problem-solving. He was not just a naval commander, he was an entrepreneur, a logistician, and a diplomat, all rolled into one. Recognizing the importance of secure harbors, Yi put significant effort into fortifying his naval bases. He knew his ships would need safe places for resupply, repair, and refuge. He oversaw the construction of defensive structures, ensuring that his fleet could operate from secure positions. These fortified bases also served as vital intelligence hubs. Yi established a sophisticated network for gathering information. He sent out scouts and spies to monitor Japanese naval movements and assess their capabilities. He wanted to know everything: their numbers, their ship types, their preferred tactics, and their supply routes. This intelligence was crucial for anticipating attacks and planning his own engagements. He never went into a battle blind, always seeking to understand his enemy better than they understood themselves. Despite Yi's tireless efforts, the political climate in Joseon remained volatile. The internal strife and factionalism within the Joseon court were a constant drain on resources and morale. Corrupt officials and jealous rivals frequently undermined Yi's efforts, seeing his growing influence as a threat to their own power. These political games created immense obstacles for Yi, forcing him to fight not only the impending Japanese invasion, but also the short-sightedness and malice within his own government. Yet, he pressed on, driven by a singular purpose: to protect Joseon. He knew that the fate of his nation rested on his shoulders, regardless of the political squabbles and personal vendettas that tried to derail his mission. His determination was a quiet, unyielding force against the chaos around him. The Japanese invasion of Joseon began in 1592, a storm that broke with terrifying speed and force. Their land forces, armed with muskets and organized into efficient, battle-hardened units, swept through the unprepared Joseon defenses. The Joseon Land Army, having enjoyed decades of relative peace, was no match for the invaders. They were largely equipped with antiquated weapons and lacked the discipline and coordination of the Japanese. Cities and towns fell in quick succession, a brutal testament to Joseon's military complacency. The speed of the Japanese advance was shocking. Within weeks, Joseon's northern defenses crumbled. Panic seized the capital, Hanyang. The king, Seonjo, made the agonizing decision to flee, abandoning his people and his city. This flight, while perhaps necessary for his survival, further demoralized the populace and highlighted the complete collapse of central authority. The nation was in chaos, its leadership scattered, its people facing an enemy that seemed unstoppable on land. The future of Joseon looked bleak. Amidst this catastrophe, Admiral Yi Sun-sin and his fleet found themselves in a peculiar and strategic isolation. Stationed in the southern provinces, far from the capital's immediate collapse, they were largely cut off from central command. This isolation, however, proved to be a hidden advantage. While the rest of the country fragmented, Yi retained his operational autonomy. He continued to build, train, and prepare, knowing that the real fight, the one that could save Joseon, would be fought on the sea. His position in the south meant he was perfectly placed to intercept the Japanese naval forces, which were crucial for supplying their rapidly advancing land armies. Yi understood the critical role his fleet would play. The Japanese needed to transport supplies, reinforcements, and siege equipment by sea to sustain their invasion. Without naval dominance, their land campaign would eventually starve. Yi knew this, and he was ready. His first engagement came at the Battle of Okpo. The Japanese fleet, confident after their overwhelming success on land, had anchored in Okpo Bay, expecting no resistance. Yi, however, had been meticulously tracking their movements. On May 7th, 1592, he led his fleet into the bay. It was a moment of immense tension. His men, while rigorously trained, had never faced the Japanese in actual combat. But Yi's presence, his calm determination, instilled confidence. The battle was swift and decisive. Yi's ships, with their superior firepower and disciplined crews, engaged the unsuspecting Japanese. The Joseon cannons tore through the Japanese vessels, which were mostly transport ships and lightly armed war junks. Japanese sailors, accustomed to boarding actions, were unprepared for the long-range bombardment. Yi's fleet sank over 40 Japanese ships without losing a single one of his own. This was more than just a victory, it was a revelation. It prevented the Japanese from resupplying their land forces and demonstrated the shocking effectiveness of Yi's new tactics and his turtle ships. Following Okpo, Yi continued his relentless pursuit. The Battle of Happo and the Battle of Jogjinpo soon followed. In these engagements, Yi's fleet repeatedly ambushed and decimated Japanese transport and warships. At Happo, he destroyed 11 ships. Days later, at Jogjinpo, he sank another 13. Each victory was a hammer blow to the Japanese supply lines, further disrupting their advance and sowing doubt in their minds. Yi's strategy was clear: choke the Japanese land forces by cutting off their lifeline from the sea. The psychological impact of these early naval victories was immense. On land, Joseon faced defeat after defeat, with cities burning and the king in retreat. But at sea, a different story unfolded. Yi Sun-sin's fleet was winning, consistently and decisively. These victories provided a much-needed morale boost for the beleaguered Joseon people. They heard tales of an invincible admiral and his unyielding ships, a beacon of hope in a darkening time. For the Japanese, it was the opposite. Their initial confidence was replaced by a growing fear of the Joseon Navy, a force they had underestimated and now found themselves unable to overcome. The sea, which they had planned to use as their highway to conquest, was becoming a grave. The Japanese naval strategy had primarily relied on overwhelming numbers and boarding actions. Their ships were designed for close-quarters combat, allowing their skilled samurai to board enemy vessels and fight hand-to-hand. They were not equipped, either tactically or structurally, for the kind of long-range cannon fire and precise maneuvering that Yi's fleet employed. Their ships were often built lighter, prioritizing speed and capacity for troops over defensive armor. This fundamental difference in naval philosophy proved to be their undoing against Yi's heavily armed and armored vessels. They were facing an adversary who had reinvented naval warfare, an adversary whose ships were floating fortresses, impervious to their traditional boarding tactics, and armed with cannons that could sink them before they even got close. You had turned their strength into their weakness. With the initial skirmishes establishing Yi's dominance, the time came for his revolutionary weapon, the turtle ship, to truly make its mark. The Battle of Sacheon in July 1592 provided the perfect stage. Yi, ever the strategist, lured a large Japanese fleet into the narrow waters near Sacheon, where their numerical advantage would be less impactful. As the Japanese ships pressed forward, confident in their numbers, Yi unleashed his turtle ships for the first time in a major engagement. The sight must have been terrifying for the Japanese. These strange armored vessels, unlike anything they had ever encountered, moved with purpose, their dragonhead prows belching smoke and fire. The turtle ships, with their heavily armored decks, were virtually impervious to the Japanese arrows and arquebus fire. They sailed directly into the Japanese formation, disrupting their lines, firing their cannons from all sides. The devastating impact was immediate. The Japanese ships built for boarding found themselves unable to grapple onto the smooth, spiked backs of the turtle ships. Their relatively light construction offered no defense against the Joseon cannons, which tore through their hulls. The battle was a rout. Yi's fleet sank 13 Japanese ships, again without losing a single one of his own. Sacheon was a clear demonstration of the turtle ship's power and Yi's tactical genius. Following this resounding success, Yi continued his campaign. The Battle of Dangpo, just days later, showcased Yi's tactical brilliance once more. A Japanese fleet, including a flagship carrying a prominent general, anchored near Dangpo. Yi, instead of a direct assault, employed a clever tactic. He sent a small group of his fastest ships to harass the Japanese, drawing them out from their anchorage. As the Japanese pursued, Yi's main fleet, including the turtle ships, lay in wait, hidden from view. Once the Japanese were lured into a disadvantageous position, Yi's ships emerged, forming a crescent formation that enveloped the surprised Japanese. The combined arms approach, with the turtle ships breaking their lines and the standard Joseon warships delivering broadsides, proved overwhelming. The Japanese general's flagship was sunk, and his men were either killed or forced to flee. This victory further solidified Yi's control over the southern seas and demonstrated his mastery of naval maneuvers and combined fleet operations. The string of victories continued with the Battle of Danghangpo. Here Yi encountered another large Japanese fleet. He again used his signature crescent formation, trapping the enemy ships. The turtle ships were at the forefront, their cannons firing relentlessly, creating chaos. The battle was another decisive win, with Joseon forces sinking over 20 Japanese ships. Each engagement was not just a victory, it was a lesson, a testament to Yi's innovative approach to naval warfare. He was systematically dismantling Japanese naval power, one fleet at a time. The role of the turtle ship in these battles cannot be overstated. Its unique design was a game-changer. The fully enclosed armored deck protected the crew from enemy fire, allowing them to operate their cannons with relative safety. The spikes on the deck prevented boarding attempts, turning the Japanese primary tactic into a liability. Its multiple cannon ports, positioned on all sides, allowed it to fire in any direction without having to turn the ship, a significant tactical advantage. These ships were floating fortresses designed to withstand punishment and deliver devastating blows. They created havoc among the Japanese fleet, striking fear and confusion, especially because the Japanese had no counter for them. They were simply a level of naval technology the Japanese had not conceived of. Yi's naval tactics were a masterclass in strategy. He understood the importance of intelligence, always knowing the enemy's movements and strength. He meticulously studied the tides and currents, using them to his advantage, often drawing Japanese ships into unfavorable waters. His crescent formation, designed to encircle and trap enemy fleets, became a hallmark of his genius. He also employed feigned retreats, drawing overconfident Japanese captains into ambushes. His fleets operated with remarkable coordination and discipline, a direct result of his rigorous training. He didn't just have superior ships, he had a superior system, a superior mind directing it all. The critical importance of these victories lay in their ability to disrupt Japanese logistics. The Japanese invasion force on land relied entirely on naval supply lines for reinforcements, food, and ammunition. By consistently sinking their transport ships and war vessels, Yi effectively cut off these lifelines. This meant that the Japanese land forces, despite their initial successes, were slowly being starved of resources. Their advance slowed, then stalled. The coastal garrisons they established became isolated, vulnerable outposts. Yi's naval campaign was not just winning battles, it was winning the war by strangling the enemy's supply chain. As Yi's string of victories grew, so did his fame and recognition. While the Joseon court was still embroiled in political squabbles and land forces struggled, Yi Sun-sin became a national hero. His name echoed across Joseon, a symbol of resistance and hope. The common people, suffering under Japanese occupation, looked to him as their savior. He was no longer just an admiral, he was the most effective commander against the invasion, a man who consistently delivered victories against overwhelming odds. His reputation even reached the Japanese, who began to speak of him with respect and growing fear. They knew that as long as Admiral Yi commanded the Joseon Navy, their grand ambitions of conquest would remain out of reach. The Japanese High Command, after suffering repeated and devastating losses at sea, finally began to grasp the true nature of the threat posed by Yi Sun-sin and his formidable navy. Their initial arrogance, fueled by easy victories on land, had turned into a grudging respect, and then a deep concern. They realized that as long as Yi's fleet controlled the seas, their supply lines would remain severed, and their land forces, however successful initially, would eventually wither and die. This understanding led to a significant shift in their strategy. No longer could they afford to send piecemeal fleets to challenge Yi. They needed a decisive encounter, a major naval confrontation to consolidate their forces and crush the Joseon Navy once and for all. They began to gather their scattered naval units, recalling ships from various coastal operations, preparing for a massive, coordinated attack. The stage was being set for a monumental clash. Yi, with his sharp strategic mind and extensive intelligence network, was not caught off guard. He meticulously tracked the Japanese movements, anticipating their renewed aggression. He knew a major confrontation was inevitable, and he prepared for it with his characteristic thoroughness. His preparations involved not just readying his ships and men, but also carefully choosing the battlefield. He understood that against a numerically superior enemy, terrain advantage was crucial. He studied charts, observed currents, and gathered every piece of information that could give him an edge. His fleet, though victorious, was still smaller than the combined Japanese forces. He knew he could not afford a direct, open-sea engagement. He needed to lure them into a trap, a place where their numbers would become a disadvantage, not a strength. This careful planning culminated in his choice of the waters around Hansen Island. Here, Yi envisioned his famous crane wing formation. This was not a simple line battle formation. It was a complex tactical maneuver designed to encircle and destroy the enemy fleet. The crane wing involved positioning the main body of his fleet in the center, drawing the Japanese in, while two wings, like the outstretched wings of a crane, would then swing forward and inward, trapping the enemy ships in a deadly embrace. This formation allowed his ships to concentrate their superior cannon fire from multiple angles onto the tightly packed Japanese vessels, preventing their preferred boarding tactics and maximizing the destruction. It was a brilliant, almost artistic application of naval strategy, transforming the open sea into a killing field for the unsuspecting Japanese. The engagement at Hansen Island began with Yi employing a feigned retreat, a tactic he had used successfully before. A small vanguard of Joseon ships engaged the Japanese, then turned and fled, drawing the overconfident Japanese fleet into the open waters near Hansen Island. As the Japanese pursued, eager to finally corner and destroy Yi's legendary fleet, they found themselves sailing directly into the carefully laid trap. Once they were deep enough into the killing zone, Yi's main fleet, hidden behind the islands, emerged, and the crane wing formation snapped shut. The two wings of the Joseon fleet swept around, enclosing the Japanese from both sides. The sound of hundreds of cannons firing filled the air, a terrifying symphony of destruction. The devastation of the Japanese fleet was overwhelming. Caught in the crane wing formation, the Japanese ships were tightly packed, making them easy targets for Yi's powerful cannons. Cannonballs ripped through their wooden hulls, shattering masts and igniting fires. The Japanese, whose primary tactic relied on grappling and boarding, found themselves unable to close the distance. Their lighter, faster ships, designed for quick skirmishes and boarding actions, were no match for the heavily armored turtle ships and the disciplined, long-range fire of the Joseon fleet. Chaos erupted among the Japanese ranks. Ships collided with each other in their desperate attempts to escape the relentless barrage. Many capsized, others burned, and countless Japanese sailors drowned. The battle was less a fight and more an execution. Yi's ships systematically annihilated their adversaries, leaving a trail of wreckage and despair. The strategic significance of Hansen Island cannot be overstated. It was more than just another victory. It was a profound turning point in the Imjin War. The Battle of Hansen Island effectively crippled Japanese naval power. They lost dozens of ships and thousands of men, a blow from which their navy would never fully recover during the war. This defeat meant that the Japanese could no longer resupply their land forces in Joseon by sea with any consistency or safety. Their grand invasion plans, which relied on a constant flow of reinforcements and provisions, were now in tatters. Hansen Island sealed their fate, preventing further reinforcement and supply by sea, forcing their land forces into an increasingly untenable position. The awe and recognition Yi's victory garnered were immense, even from the Japanese. Their own commanders, though defeated, acknowledged the sheer scale and tactical brilliance of the battle. News of the victory spread like wildfire throughout Joseon, bringing renewed hope to a nation that had been on the brink of collapse. Even in China, the Ming dynasty, Joseon's powerful ally, took notice, understanding that Yi Sun-sin was a force to be reckoned with. Hansen Island solidified Yi's reputation as one of the greatest naval commanders in history, a man who, against impossible odds, had single-handedly changed the course of a war. The immediate consequences of the Battle of Hansen Island rippled through the war. The Japanese, reeling from the devastating naval loss, were forced to retreat from many of their coastal strongholds. Their plans for a swift, decisive conquest of Joseon, heavily reliant on naval supremacy, had been shattered. This shift in momentum, though not an immediate end to the conflict, gave Joseon a vital breathing room and changed the entire strategic landscape of the war. The Japanese land forces, now largely cut off from their supply lines, found themselves in a much more precarious position, their aggressive advance faltering. It was around this time that the Ming dynasty, Joseon's powerful neighbor and traditional suzerain, finally intervened in earnest. Alarmed by the prospect of a unified Japan controlling Joseon and potentially threatening their own borders, the Ming emperor dispatched a large expeditionary force. This intervention marked a new phase in the Imjin War, transforming it into a much larger, prolonged land conflict. While Ming armies engaged the Japanese on land, pushing them back from the northern provinces, Yi's fleet continued its relentless work in the southern seas. Despite the land stalemate that settled over much of Joseon, Yi's naval dominance remained absolute. His fleet, though numerically smaller than the Japanese overall, maintained an ironclad blockade along the southern coast. This wasn't merely about preventing large-scale resupply. It was a constant harassment, a never-ending pressure on any Japanese vessel daring to venture out. Small skirmishes were frequent, with Yi's ships intercepting Japanese transport convoys, sinking supply vessels, and keeping their remaining coastal garrisons isolated and undersupplied. The Japanese forces on land were increasingly starved of food, ammunition, and reinforcements, their morale slowly eroding under the constant strain. However, sustaining such a formidable fleet was a monumental challenge for Yi. Joseon's resources were stretched thin by the prolonged war. He constantly faced shortages of timber, iron, gunpowder, and even food for his sailors. Political interference from the Joseon court remained a persistent headache. Even in the face of his undeniable victories, envious officials and skeptical bureaucrats often questioned his methods and tried to divert resources elsewhere. The constant threat of Japanese counterattacks, though less frequent after Hansen Island, meant Yi could never truly rest, always needing to be vigilant, always planning his next move to protect Joseon's vital sea lanes. Throughout this period of stalemate, Yi's fleet engaged in numerous smaller battles and patrols. These weren't the grand, decisive engagements like Hansen Island, but rather a continuous grind. They were crucial for keeping the Japanese at bay, for protecting the Joseon coastlines from opportunistic raids, and for maintaining the integrity of the blockade. Each intercepted Japanese ship, each thwarted landing attempt, chipped away at the invaders' strength and resolve. Yi's meticulous intelligence gathering continued, ensuring that his fleet was almost always a step ahead, ready to intercept any Japanese movement. The psychological toll Yi's relentless naval pressure took on the Japanese forces was immense. Trapped in a foreign land, facing stiff resistance from combined Joseon and Ming armies, and constantly cut off from their homeland by Yi's unyielding fleet, their initial confidence turned into despair. The Japanese soldiers, once seemingly invincible, found themselves increasingly isolated and undersupplied, their once proud naval force reduced to a shadow of its former self. They feared the very sight of a Joseon sail, especially the ominous dragon-headed turtle ships, knowing that encountering them meant almost certain destruction. Amidst this prolonged struggle, the Joseon king, who had fled the capital in the early days of the invasion, was able to return to a partially recovered capital. This symbolic return offered a glimmer of hope to the Joseon people, suggesting a slow but steady recovery. However, the reality on the ground, especially in the southern provinces where Yi operated, was one of grinding warfare. While the capital could begin to rebuild, the critical fight for survival continued, largely on the shoulders of Admiral Yi Sun-sin and his unbreakable fleet, a silent, unyielding guardian of the Joseon seas. His strategic genius had bought Joseon time, but the war was far from over. The war's prolonged stalemate, while strategically beneficial for Joseon, also created fertile ground for internal strife and political machinations within the Joseon court. Yi Sun-sin's unblemished record and immense popularity, especially among the common people, made him a target for jealous officials and rivals who felt overshadowed by his brilliance. His unwavering adherence to principles, his strict discipline, and his absolute refusal to tolerate corruption had earned him many powerful enemies among the Joseon elite. He was a man who spoke truth to power, a trait rarely appreciated in a court rife with backstabbing and self-interest. These enemies, often part of factions vying for influence, saw Yi's successes not as a national triumph, but as a personal threat to their own standing. They whispered in the king's ear, sowing seeds of doubt about Yi's loyalty and ambition, twisting his strategic decisions into acts of insubordination. The opportunity for Yi's downfall came through a carefully orchestrated plot, a deliberate fabrication designed to lure him into a trap and discredit him permanently. A Japanese spy, or rather, a Joseon double agent manipulated by Yi's enemies, delivered a report to the Joseon court. This report claimed that a major Japanese fleet, led by the General Kato Kiyomasa, was about to cross the sea and could be easily ambushed at a specific location if the Joseon Navy acted immediately. This intelligence was completely false, a deceitful scheme crafted to put Yi in an impossible position. The court, eager for a decisive land victory and perhaps tired of the naval stalemate, issued a direct command to Yi Sun-sin: intercept and destroy Kato's fleet at the specified location. Yi, however, was a master of intelligence and strategy. He knew the waters, he understood Japanese tactics, and he saw through the thinly veiled deception. His own intelligence network had reported no such large-scale Japanese movement, and the location specified in the false report was tactically unsound, a death trap for his fleet. It was a narrow, treacherous strait where his large ships would be vulnerable to a Japanese boarding action, negating the advantage of his cannons. He knew that obeying this order would mean the annihilation of his fleet and the likely death of his men. He refused. He defied the direct command from the king, stating that the intelligence was false and that to engage in such a battle would be suicidal. His defiance, though militarily sound, was interpreted by his enemies at court as insubordination and treason. The consequences of Yi's refusal were swift and brutal. His enemies had their pretext. He was immediately arrested, stripped of his command, and dragged back to the capital for trial. There, he was subjected to brutal torture, designed to extract a confession of disloyalty or cowardice. Despite the physical torment, It maintained his innocence and his conviction that his actions were for the good of Joseon. He endured the beatings and the accusations with his usual stoicism, refusing to break. Though he was not executed, perhaps due to his immense popularity among the populace and the quiet support of some honest officials, he was imprisoned and sentenced to fight as a common soldier under General Guan Yul. In Yi's place, the Joseon court appointed his long-standing rival, General Won Gyun, to command the Joseon Navy. This decision was driven purely by political motives rather than military competence. Won Gyun was known for his jealousy of Yi, his lack of strategic foresight, and his overall incompetence as a naval commander. He had previously commanded a small fleet and had shown little ability. The court, desperate to assert its authority and perhaps influenced by those who wanted Yi out of the picture, believed that any general could lead the victorious Joseon fleet. They severely underestimated the unique genius required to command such a force. Despite his imprisonment and the smear campaign against him, public outcry and support for Yi Sun-sin were widespread. The common people, who had witnessed his unwavering dedication and his string of impossible victories, knew the truth. They revered him as a national hero, a protector against the Japanese invaders. Even some loyal officials, dismayed by the court's short-sightedness and the obvious injustice, voiced their concerns, though often quietly fearing repercussions. They understood that removing Yi from command, especially in the midst of a war, was a catastrophic mistake, a betrayal of the very man who had saved Joseon from total defeat. The stage was now set for a disaster of epic proportions, as Joseon's naval strength, so carefully built and masterfully commanded by Yi, was placed in the hands of a man utterly unqualified to wield it. The storm clouds were gathering once more, but this time they were within Joseon itself. Won Gyun took command of the Joseon Navy, a force forged by Yi Sun-sin into an elite fighting unit. However, Won Gyun possessed none of Yi's strategic brilliance, discipline, or foresight. His leadership was marked by a dangerous combination of arrogance and incompetence. He dismissed Yi's meticulous training regimens, relaxed discipline, and showed little understanding of naval tactics. The sailors, who had learned to trust and respect Yi, quickly grew demoralized under Won Gyun's erratic leadership. The fleet, once a symbol of Joseon's resilience, began to fray at the edges, its fighting spirit eroding with each passing day under its new, unqualified commander. Meanwhile, the Japanese commanders, particularly Hideyoshi, were keenly aware of the internal strife within the Joseon court. They had received intelligence about Yi Sun-sin's removal and Won Gyun's appointment. This was the opportunity they had been waiting for. With the Sea Tiger removed from play, they believed the Joseon Navy was vulnerable. They quickly formulated a plan for a decisive naval strike, aiming to crush the Joseon fleet once and for all and reopen their crucial sea supply lines. They gathered a massive fleet, far outnumbering the Joseon vessels, and prepared to launch a full-scale assault. This was not just a skirmish. It was intended to be the final annihilating blow to Joseon's naval power. The stage for disaster was set at Chilcheoliang. Won Gyun, eager to prove himself and perhaps driven by a desire to outdo Yi Sun-sin, ignored all warnings about the overwhelming Japanese force and the unfavorable tactical position. He led the Joseon fleet into a narrow, exposed bay, leaving them vulnerable to encirclement. On July 16, 1597, the Japanese fleet, numbering hundreds of ships, descended upon the unsuspecting Joseon navy. The battle was a complete catastrophe. Won Gyun's leadership was non-existent. He made critical blunders, failing to organize his ships effectively, neglecting to utilize the turtle ship's strengths, and allowing his fleet to be caught in a disorganized mess. The Japanese, employing their superior numbers and boarding tactics, swarmed the Joseon vessels. The annihilation of the Joseon fleet was swift and brutal. The meticulously built ships, including most of the precious turtle ships, were destroyed or captured. The well-trained sailors, deprived of competent leadership, fought bravely but were overwhelmed. The Japanese, fueled by their desire for revenge against the navy that had thwarted them for years, showed no mercy. The sea turned red with blood as Joseon's naval power, once invincible under Yi Sun-sin, was almost entirely wiped out. Only a handful of ships, perhaps 12 in total, managed to escape the carnage, fleeing into the night. Won-gyun himself met a grim end. In the chaos of the battle, his flagship was attacked. He attempted to escape to shore, but was killed by Japanese soldiers, a fitting, though tragic, end for a commander whose arrogance and incompetence had cost Joseon so dearly. The news of the defeat and Won-gyun's death sent waves of profound despair across Joseon. It was a national tragedy of immense proportions. The people, who had clung to the hope provided by Yi Sun-sin's victories, now faced a future without a navy, seemingly defenseless against the relentless Japanese invasion. The once proud Joseon fleet lay in ruins, a testament to the devastating consequences of political intrigue and a complete disregard for military aptitude. The repercussions for Joseon were immediate and devastating. With the Joseon navy destroyed, the sea lanes were now wide open for the Japanese. Their supply lines, which Yi Sun-sin had so effectively choked for years, were re-established. Japanese land forces, who had been struggling with dwindling supplies, were now resupplied and reinforced. This allowed them to launch renewed offensives, pushing deeper into Joseon territory and causing widespread destruction. The fear and despair that had briefly receded after Yi's earlier victories now returned with a vengeance, darker and more pervasive than ever. Coastal areas, once protected, were now vulnerable to raids and further incursions, leaving the populace at the mercy of the invaders. The Joseon king, stripped of his naval protection, was plunged into a desperate state. The reality of the situation hit hard. He had allowed political maneuvering and personal grudges to dismantle the only effective defense Joseon had against the Japanese. The king, who had once ordered Yi's torture and imprisonment, now faced the stark truth. Only Yi Sun-sin could save his kingdom. The cries for Yi's reinstatement grew louder and more urgent, not just from the common people, but now from within the court itself. The king, swallowing his pride and acknowledging his grave error, knew he had no other choice. Joseon's survival hinged on the return of the very man he had betrayed. The nation's hope, however faint, now rested solely on the shoulders of the imprisoned admiral. The king's royal decree, born from sheer desperation, was a stark admission of his colossal error. He had no other choice but to recall Admiral Yi Sun-sin. The weight of the Chilcholyang disaster, the annihilation of his fleet, and the renewed Japanese threat pressed down on him, forcing him to swallow his pride. Messengers were dispatched to find Yi, who was still serving as a common soldier, stripped of his rank and honor, a direct consequence of the king's own misguided judgment. The king's plea was not just for Yi to return to command. It was an unspoken apology, an acknowledgement that only Yi possessed the strategic brilliance and unwavering resolve to pull Joseon back from the brink of total collapse. Yi Sun-sin, a man who had endured torture and humiliation at the king's behest, was released from prison. The order came through, a swift reversal of fortune driven by urgent necessity. He was free, but the freedom felt heavy, burdened by the immense tragedy that had unfolded in his absence. His initial reaction was not one of immediate acceptance. The betrayal had cut deep. To be cast aside, slandered, and almost executed, only to be begged to return when all seemed lost, was a bitter pill. Yet his commitment to Joseon, his deep-seated patriotism, outweighed his personal pain and resentment. He understood that his country truly had no other hope. His duty, above all else, called him back to the sea. The reality that greeted Yi was grim, far worse than any report could convey. He made his way to the remnants of the Joseon Navy, what little was left after the Chilcheolyang catastrophe. Instead of the proud fleet he had painstakingly built, he found a handful of ships, no more than 12, battered and broken. The sight was heartbreaking. These were not the formidable vessels that had crushed the Japanese at Hansen Island. These were the pathetic survivors of a massacre barely seaworthy. More devastating than the physical state of the ships was the condition of the sailors. They were demoralized, their spirits crushed by the overwhelming defeat, their trust in leadership shattered, and their hope all but extinguished. Resources were non-existent, the supply lines in disarray, and the infrastructure he had built lay in ruins. It was a complete and utter vacuum of everything he needed to fight a war. Despite this overwhelming despair, his resilience and determination shone through. He was a man forged in adversity, his spirit unbreakable. He looked at the wreckage of his navy, listened to the despair of his few remaining officers, and understood the impossible task ahead. But surrender was not in his nature. He accepted the command. His decision was not about personal glory or vindication. It was about the survival of Joseon. He knew he was the last line of defense, and he would not falter. His country needed him, and he would answer that call, even if it meant facing certain death. His first task was to rally the remaining forces, a monumental challenge in itself. He walked among the demoralized sailors, his presence alone a beacon of hope. They had seen him unjustly punished, yet here he was, back again, ready to lead. His reputation, though tarnished by political enemies, remained untainted in the hearts of the common folk and the loyal sailors who had served under him. He spoke to them not with grand promises, but with a quiet, firm resolve. He reminded them of their past victories, of their duty, and of the unique skills they possessed. He began to instill discipline, not through harsh punishment, but through the sheer force of his character and his unwavering belief in their purpose. He reorganized the few surviving vessels, assessing their capabilities, making do with what he had. Every single sailor, every piece of salvaged equipment, every remaining cannon became a critical component of his desperate plan. The task before him was impossible by any conventional measure. He had a battered fleet of 12 ships, a fraction of the mighty Japanese armada, which now sailed with renewed confidence, believing the Joseon Navy was utterly destroyed. He was expected to defend an entire coastline, to stop an invasion with a force that seemed little more than a token resistance. The numerical disparity was staggering. The Japanese had hundreds of warships, fully supplied and eager to finish what they had started at Chilcheolyang. Yet Yi Sun-sin, with his 12 ships, was Joseon's last hope. He had to find a way to turn this impossible situation into a victory, or Joseon would fall. The news of Yi's return spread like wildfire across Joseon. It was a glimmer of light in the darkest hour. The public, who had mourned his unjust removal and despaired at the naval disaster, now felt a surge of renewed hope. The people had always trusted Yi Sun-sin. They knew his integrity, his courage, and his unparalleled skill. His return against such overwhelming odds became a symbol of defiance. It was a message that Joseon was not yet defeated, that their spirit was not broken. The hero was back, and with him a fragile, desperate hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the tide could still be turned. The entire nation held its breath, placing its faith, once again, in the man who had never lost a ship. Even with only 12 left, with Joseon's naval power reduced to a mere 12 ships, he knew that open sea engagements were out of the question. He could not face the Japanese armada, now swollen with confidence and numbers, in a direct confrontation. Such a move would be suicidal, leading to the complete annihilation of his last remaining vessels and the final collapse of Joseon's coastal defense. His only chance lay in strategy, in turning the environment itself into an ally. He needed a battlefield where individual skill and tactical genius could overcome brute force and overwhelming numbers. His eyes turned to the Myeongnyang Strait. The Myeongnyang Strait was not just any body of water, it was a geographical marvel, a natural choke point that seemed designed for a desperate defense. Located between Jindo Island and the mainland, it was notoriously narrow, barely 300 meters wide at its tightest point. But its most formidable feature was its currents. The strait was infamous for its rapid, swirling tides, which could reach speeds of up to 10 knots, changing direction dramatically with the ebb and flow. These currents created treacherous whirlpools and hidden reefs, making navigation perilous even for experienced sailors. For an invading fleet, especially one unfamiliar with its peculiarities, it could be a death trap. Yi Sun-sin, with his intimate knowledge of Joseon's coasts and waterways, had meticulously studied this strait for years. He understood its moods, its dangers, and crucially, its potential. He knew exactly when the currents would shift, how they would behave, and how to harness their power. He began to plan, not just a battle, but an ambush, using the very forces of nature as his primary weapon. He envisioned a scenario where the Japanese numerical superiority would become a crippling disadvantage, where their hundreds of ships would choke the narrow passage, colliding with each other as the currents pulled them into chaos. However, even with such a brilliant strategic location, he faced a daunting challenge: the morale of his own men. His fleet was tiny, battered, and terrified. They had just witnessed the wholesale destruction of their navy at Chilcholyang. Many of them had lost friends, brothers, and ships. The idea of facing the massive Japanese fleet with only 12 vessels seemed like madness, a desperate last-gasp suicide mission. He knew that before he could fight the enemy, he had to conquer the fear within his own ranks. He moved among his sailors, speaking to them, not as a distant admiral, but as a leader who shared their burden. He reminded them of their duty, their homes, their families, and the sacred soil of Joseon they were defending. He drew upon his own unyielding reputation, his personal integrity, and his unwavering belief in their cause. He used every ounce of his inspirational leadership to rekindle their courage, to make them believe that even against impossible odds, victory was still within reach. He told them, "If you are afraid to die, you cannot live." His plan was simple in its audacity: lure the Japanese into the narrowest part of the strait. He strategically positioned his meager fleet, not in a defensive line, but in a way that would appear vulnerable, inviting the enemy to press forward. He had chains stretched underneath the water, ready to ensnare their vessels, and his men had meticulously marked the locations of every hidden reef and treacherous current. He built a small rampart on a nearby hill, from which he could observe the entire strait, giving him a perfect vantage point to direct his fleet and anticipate the Japanese movements. Everything was set. The trap was laid. The Japanese, meanwhile, were advancing with overwhelming confidence. Their intelligence reports confirmed the near-total destruction of the Joseon Navy. They believed that only a handful of ships remained, commanded by an admiral who had been disgraced and tortured. They expected an easy victory, a final mop-up operation that would clear the seas and allow their land forces to receive unfettered supplies. Their massive fleet, numbering over 300 ships, including about 130 large fighting vessels, sailed towards Myeongnyang, their crews eager to crush the last vestiges of Joseon resistance. They saw the small cluster of 12 Joseon ships as a final pathetic gesture of defiance, an obstacle easily swept aside. The eve of battle was charged with an almost unbearable tension. For Yi's men, it was a night of profound reflection, of quiet prayers, and of steeling themselves for what was to come. Many felt the cold grip of impending doom, knowing that they were likely sailing to their deaths. Yet the presence of their admiral, his calm demeanor, his unwavering resolve, instilled in them a fragile spark of hope. They had witnessed his miracles before. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could work another one. Yi himself spent the night in meticulous preparation, reviewing his plans, studying the tide charts, and ensuring every detail was perfect. He knew the fate of Joseon rested on his shoulders, on the courage of his few men, and on the cunning of his strategy. The sun would soon rise, and with it, the most impossible battle in Joseon's history. The morning dawned, grey and heavy, reflecting the mood of the Joseon sailors. The air was still, a false calm before the storm. As the first rays of light touched the Myeongyang Strait, the ominous silhouette of the Japanese fleet appeared on the horizon, a seemingly endless armada stretching across the sea. Their numbers were staggering, a forest of masts and sails against the morning sky. Yi Sun-sin stood on the deck of his flagship, his gaze fixed on the approaching enemy, a quiet intensity in his eyes. He gave the signal, and his 12 ships moved into position, a tiny, defiant line facing an overwhelming tide. The Battle of Myeongyang had begun. The Japanese advanced, their ships filling the strait, their commanders confident that this would be a swift and decisive victory. They expected resistance, but not the kind Yi had prepared. As their leading ships entered the narrowest part of the channel, the true power of the Myeongyang Strait began to assert itself. The currents, which Yi had studied with such meticulous care, suddenly shifted, turning the calm waters into a swirling vortex. The powerful tide, now flowing against the Japanese advance, began to pull and push their massive vessels, making them difficult to control. Ships collided with each other, their crews shouting in confusion as they struggled to maintain formation. The very geography of the strait, Yi's silent ally, was wreaking havoc on the enemy. Yi's tactical genius shone through in this chaos. Instead of engaging in a broad, open battle, he used the strait to his advantage, forcing the Japanese into a bottleneck where their numerical superiority became a liability. His 12 ships, smaller and more agile, navigated the treacherous currents with practiced ease. They moved like predators, striking at the confused Japanese vessels, then retreating to safety, only to reappear from another angle. Yi's strategy was not to meet force with force, but to exploit the enemy's weaknesses and the environment's strengths. The flagship, under Yi's direct command, was at the heart of the action, a beacon of courage. It was the first to engage, firing its powerful cannons into the struggling Japanese ships. Many of the Joseon captains, initially hesitant and paralyzed by fear, watched their admiral's ship bravely facing the overwhelming enemy. Yu had anticipated this fear. He had given clear orders before the battle. "Even if you must die, do not let my flagship be alone." Seeing their admiral leading from the front, defying the impossible, sparked a flame in their hearts. One by one, the other Joseon ships began to move, following Yi's lead, their fear slowly replaced by a fierce determination. They understood that this was their only chance, their last stand. The devastating effect of Joseon cannon fire was immediate and brutal. Unlike the Japanese, who relied heavily on boarding actions and close-quarters combat, Yi's navy was built for ranged warfare. Their cannons, fired with precision and at close range due to the crowded strait, tore through the wooden hulls of the Japanese ships. The turtle ships, though few, were especially effective, their armored shells deflecting enemy fire, while their multiple cannons unleashed a torrent of destruction. Japanese ships, already battling the fierce currents, became easy targets. Their attempts to board were thwarted by the swift maneuvers of the Joseon ships and the constant barrage of cannonballs and arrows. The strait became a killing field, littered with debris and the bodies of Japanese sailors. As the day wore on, the tide turned again, now favoring the Joseon ships, allowing them even greater maneuverability. The Japanese, demoralized and disoriented, their ranks shattered by the currents and the relentless Joseon attacks, began to lose their will to fight. Their initial confidence had evaporated, replaced by bewilderment and terror. They had expected an easy victory, but instead, They were being systematically destroyed by a tiny fleet they had dismissed as insignificant. The sight of their own ships sinking, burning, and crashing into each other was enough to break their resolve. Finally, with heavy losses and their morale shattered, the Japanese fleet began its bewildered retreat. Their commanders, unable to comprehend what had just happened, ordered a full withdrawal, leaving behind a scene of utter devastation. The Battle of Myeongyang, a battle that should have been a massacre for the Joseon forces, ended in an incredible victory. Yi Sun-sin, with only 12 ships, had defeated a fleet of over 300, sinking dozens of Japanese vessels and inflicting thousands of casualties, all while suffering minimal losses himself. It was a victory that solidified Yi's legend, not just as a brilliant tactician, but as a man who could defy all odds, a testament to the power of strategy, preparation, and unwavering courage against overwhelming numbers. The miracle at Myeongyang was complete, and Joseon had survived another day. The psychological and strategic impact of the Battle of Myeongyang was profound, reverberating through both Joseon and Japanese command structures. For Joseon, it was a miracle, a desperate stand that had somehow succeeded against impossible odds. It shattered the Japanese illusion of naval invincibility, an illusion they had carefully cultivated after the disaster at Chilcholyang. The victory at Myeongyang bought Joseon precious time, allowing their battered land forces, now bolstered by Ming Chinese reinforcements, to regroup and push back against the Japanese invasion. It meant that the Japanese could not easily use the western sea routes to resupply their armies or launch new attacks on Joseon's heartland. The coastal waters, once again, became a dangerous place for them. However, the war was far from over. News soon arrived that Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the ambitious unifier of Japan, was not deterred by the naval setbacks. He was a man obsessed with his grand vision of conquering Joseon and then China. Undeterred by previous failures and the immense cost in lives and resources, Hideyoshi sent another massive invasion force, his second major attempt to subjugate Joseon. This new wave of Japanese troops landed on Joseon soil, reigniting the land war with renewed ferocity. The land battles continued to be brutal, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Despite the renewed land offensive and the continued small size of his fleet, Yi Sun-sin maintained his relentless blockade. His surviving 12 ships, plus any new vessels they managed to acquire or repair, were constantly on patrol, harassing Japanese supply lines and preventing their free movement by sea. He understood that even if he couldn't win every battle, he could still make the sea routes too dangerous and costly for the Japanese to use effectively. Every intercepted supply ship, every skirmish that forced Japanese vessels to retreat, was a small victory that contributed to the larger war effort. He knew that starving the enemy was just as effective as defeating them in battle. On land, the situation was slowly turning. The combined efforts of Joseon and Ming land forces began to push back against the Japanese. The initial shock and speed of the Japanese invasion had worn off, and now they faced a more organized and determined resistance. The prolonged war was also taking its toll on the Japanese forces, who were far from home and increasingly suffering from disease and diminishing supplies, largely thanks to Yi's naval blockade. Slowly but surely, the tide of the land war began to turn in favor of the Allied forces, forcing the Japanese to retreat from many of their occupied territories. As the land war continued to grind on, Hideyoshi made a crucial decision. He realized that his grand conquest was failing. His forces were bogged down, and the cost was becoming unbearable. He decided to withdraw his remaining forces from Joseon, primarily by sea. This was not a simple retreat. It was a strategic evacuation of a large army, and it required careful planning and naval support. The Japanese commanders began consolidating their troops in southern coastal strongholds, preparing for the long journey back to Japan. They aimed to escape with as many men and as much equipment as possible. Yi Sun-sin, however, was not about to let them leave easily. He was determined to prevent the Japanese from escaping with their forces intact. For him, this was not just a retreat. It was an opportunity to deliver a final decisive blow to ensure that Japan would not be able to launch such an invasion again for a very long time. He gathered intelligence, tracked their movements, and began to plan for a final confrontation. He knew that allowing them to leave unmolested would only invite future aggression. His goal was complete annihilation of their retreating forces. To achieve this, Yi coordinated with the Allied naval forces. While his own fleet was still recovering and relatively small, a smaller Ming naval contingent had arrived to support the Joseon efforts. These Ming ships, though not as familiar with the local waters as Yi's men, added much-needed numbers and firepower. Together, the combined Joseon and Ming fleets prepared for a final confrontation, an ambush that would seal the fate of the retreating Japanese army. The stage was set for a climactic naval battle, one that would bring the long and arduous Imjin War to its definitive conclusion. Yi knew this would be his last chance to ensure Joseon's lasting peace. The time for the final confrontation was upon them. Admiral Yi, with his keen strategic mind, planned to intercept the retreating Japanese fleet at Noryang Strait. This narrow stretch of water, with its complex currents and tidal patterns, offered the perfect choke point for an ambush. He worked closely with the Ming naval commander Chen Lin to coordinate their forces. Chen Lin brought a significant number of ships, though his men were less experienced in these waters. He knew that precise timing and communication would be crucial. He shared his intimate knowledge of the strait, emphasizing the dangers and opportunities it presented. They would wait for the Japanese to enter the strait, then spring their trap, cutting off their escape route and preventing them from reaching the open sea. This was to be a combined operation, a testament to the alliance forged in the fires of war. As night fell on December 16, 1598, the Allied fleet positioned itself. The Japanese, under the command of Shimazu Yoshihiro, were desperately trying to make their escape. They had gathered their remaining forces, a significant number of ships packed with soldiers, aiming to slip away under the cover of darkness. What they didn't know was that Yi Sun-sin had anticipated their move. The battle that ensued at Noryang was fierce and chaotic, a brutal night engagement unlike any other in naval history. The darkness added a layer of confusion, with ships firing at shadows, the screams of men echoing across the water, and the constant roar of cannons. Both sides fought with desperation, the Japanese to escape, the Allies to prevent them. Admiral Yi was, as always, at the forefront of the battle. He led from his flagship, the sounds of war surrounding him. His presence was a beacon for his men, his calm demeanor and clear commands cutting through the pandemonium. He directed his ships, exploiting the currents and the darkness to their advantage, preventing the Japanese from forming effective battle lines. The Ming forces, though initially struggling with the unfamiliar waters, soon found their rhythm under Yi's guidance. Cannonballs ripped through wooden hulls, arrows rained down, and the sea was quickly filled with debris and the bodies of fallen soldiers. Yi personally engaged in the fighting, inspiring his men to push harder, to make this the final stand. In the midst of this maelstrom, a tragic moment unfolded. As the battle raged and victory seemed within reach, Admiral Yi was struck. A stray bullet, likely from an arquebus, pierced his chest. He fell, mortally wounded. The blow was sudden and devastating. Yet even in his dying moments, Yi's dedication to his country and his mission remained absolute. He understood the fragile morale of his men, the importance of maintaining their fighting spirit until the very end. With his last breaths, he whispered to his nephew, Yi Wan, and his son, Yi Ho, who were by his side, "Do not let my death be known." He feared that news of his demise would spread panic and allow the Japanese to escape. His final order was a desperate plea for his country, a testament to his unwavering commitment. His son and nephew obeyed, covering his body with a shield and continuing to beat the war drum, signaling their leader was still in command. The battle continued with renewed ferocity. The Allied forces, unaware of their admiral's sacrifice, pressed their attack. The Japanese, caught between the Allied fleets and the treacherous strait, suffered an overwhelming defeat. Ship after ship was sunk or captured. Their escape route was effectively sealed. This decisive victory at Noryang effectively ended their ability to withdraw effectively, marking the end of the Imjin War. The Japanese invasion force was decimated, their grand ambitions shattered. It was only after the battle had concluded, when the smoke cleared and the sounds of fighting died down, that the profound sorrow and grief swept through the Joseon and Ming forces. The truth about Admiral Yi's death could no longer be hidden. The man who had never lost a ship, who had saved his nation against impossible odds, had finally fallen. His ultimate sacrifice, made in the very last battle of the war, left an indelible mark on all who served with him. The victory was complete, but the cost was immeasurable. The joy of triumph was mixed with the bitter taste of loss. Joseon was safe, but its greatest hero was gone. The Imjin War, which had ravaged Joseon for 7 long years, finally drew to a close with the crushing defeat of the Japanese at Noryang. Their ambitions of conquering Joseon and using it as a stepping stone to China were utterly shattered. The last remnants of their invasion force were either destroyed or forced to flee in disarray, leaving behind a scarred land but a liberated people. Joseon had survived, largely thanks to the unwavering determination and strategic genius of one man, Admiral Yi Sun-sin. His sacrifice at Noryang, though tragic, had secured the final decisive victory. In the aftermath of the war, the Joseon court, which had once imprisoned and disgraced Yi, now moved to acknowledge his unparalleled contributions. Posthumous honors were heaped upon him. He was elevated to the highest official ranks, granted the title of prince, and enshrined as a national hero. Temples were built in his memory, and his deeds were meticulously recorded for posterity. These were belated acknowledgments, but they solidified his place in history as the savior of Joseon. The court, having witnessed firsthand the catastrophic consequences of dismissing his council and the miraculous victories achieved through his leadership, could no longer deny his greatness. Yi Sun-sin's story quickly became more than just historical fact. It became a cornerstone of Korean national identity. He transformed into an enduring legend, a symbol of courage, integrity, and strategic genius. His refusal to compromise his principles, his unwavering loyalty to his country even when betrayed by his own king, and his ability to achieve victory against impossible odds resonated deeply with the Joseon people. His life served as an inspiration, a testament to the idea that even in the darkest hours, a single dedicated individual could turn the tide of history. His name became synonymous with resilience and defiance in the face of overwhelming adversity. Beyond his immediate impact on the Imjin War, Yi Sun-sin's influence extended to the realm of naval warfare itself. His innovative tactics, particularly his use of the crane wing formation and his mastery of the Myeongnyang Straits currents, demonstrated a profound understanding of naval strategy that was far ahead of his time. The turtle ship, his brainchild, was a revolutionary armored warship that prefigured later developments in naval design by centuries. Its impenetrable armor, powerful cannons, and maneuverability provided a blueprint for future naval architects. He proved that technological innovation, combined with brilliant strategy and rigorous training, could overcome numerical superiority. His methods and designs were studied and admired by naval commanders for generations, cementing his legacy as a true pioneer in maritime combat. When placing Yi Sun-sin in the pantheon of history's greatest naval commanders, his achievements stand out. Figures like Horatio Nelson, famous for his victory at Trafalgar, or Themistocles, who led the Athenian fleet against the Persians at Salamis, are often cited. Yet, Yi Sun-sin's record is arguably even more remarkable. He never lost a single ship in any of the major engagements he commanded, a feat virtually unparalleled in naval history. He fought against vastly superior forces, often with limited resources, and against political opposition from his own government. His victories were not merely triumphs of skill, but of sheer will and an almost supernatural ability to turn every disadvantage into an opportunity. In contemporary Korea, Admiral Yi continues to be celebrated with an almost unparalleled reverence. His image adorns currency, colossal statues stand in prominent city squares, and countless books, films, and television dramas recount his epic tale. He is not just a historical figure, he is a living symbol of national pride and perseverance. Children grow up learning about his exploits, and his unwavering spirit is invoked during times of national challenge. His story serves as a constant reminder of the strength and resilience of the Korean people. The final reflection on Yi Sun-sin's unparalleled record, the man who never lost a ship, stands as a testament to his extraordinary leadership, strategic brilliance, and unwavering spirit. From the depths of political betrayal and near annihilation, he rose to save his nation, defying every conceivable odd. His life was a journey marked by hardship, injustice, and relentless struggle, yet he faced each challenge with an unyielding resolve. He was a commander who inspired absolute loyalty, a strategist who outwitted every enemy, and a patriot who made the ultimate sacrifice for his country. Admiral Yi Sun-sin remains to this day an unconquered spirit, a beacon of hope, and a legendary figure whose name echoes through the annals of history as the greatest naval commander who ever lived. His story reminds us that true leadership can overcome even the most impossible situations, and that courage and integrity are timeless virtues.